there. Today we are jumping into a discussion about agency. Now, as a realtor, it's important for you to have the agency discussions with your clients, whether buyers or sellers. The other day we did talk about the buyer agreement or the buyer agency, and we talked a bit about dual agency. When we went over the listing contract, we talked about dual agency then. But today we're going to jump into the buyer agency checklist and the seller agency checklist. So let's have a look at these documents. The buyer agency checklist starts out with the initial contact with your consumer. So you inquire whether the consumer is being represented by another licensee, and if they are, find out if it's exclusive or non-exclusive. If they are not, then of course you can jump in to represent that client as their agent. You do want to advise them of the designated agency relationship that will exist between you and your client. Advise your client about how compensation to a buyer's agent works. That's a big discussion. Complete, and if buyer is willing, have the buyer sign the appropriate buyer representation agreement like we had gone over the other day. If you have some questions about that, please just refer back to that day's email, rewatch the video, or you can reach out to your coaching team. You will want to advise the buyer of the names of the designated agent in writing. So if there's nothing in writing, then there's no agreement. So you can't just have a verbal agreement, it has to be in writing. And then you want to advise the consumer regarding the potential for dual agency. Some agents do have this disclosure and consent to dual agency form signed. The dual agency discussion is in your buyer agency agreement. There's the one with the dual agency and the one without the dual agency. So when you present that document, you'll have that dual agency discussion then, and your client will let you know if they want to pursue that dual agency relationship or not. We do have some additional forms that just discuss dual agency. And actually your client would sign that document with the signature, and then you sign as the broker. The confirmation to consent to dual agency then is usually presented then when your client would write the offer on a given property that would be your listing, and then you've brought the buyer, your buyer and seller both agree to dual agency. So they each agree to dual agency when you list, when you sign the buyer's agreement, or when you present that dual agency form for them to sign. And then when you write the offer, you include that confirmation of consent to dual agency. Now those additional forms, they actually are available for our use when you are in a dual agency relationship. You need to have the buyer tell you twice, confirm twice in writing that they are okay with dual agency, and the seller has to do the same, confirm twice in writing that they are okay with a dual agency relationship. So the way the forms are structured, the seller would have initialed that in the listing agreement, and then they initial it in the purchase contract. So those are substantial enough for your two notifications in writing that the seller is okay with dual agency. For a buyer, if your buyer has completed that buyer's agreement with the consent of dual agency, so they've initialed and signed that form, and then in the purchase contract they initial that they are okay with dual agency. So those are the two written forms of confirmation that the buyer is okay with that dual agency relationship. When those documents are utilized, then the actual disclosure for dual agency, just the one-page form, and the confirmation and consent to dual agency, those two documents wouldn't be necessary because you already have two signatures or initials from the buyer and then two from the seller. But again, if those initials or signatures are missing in any of those places, we have to have two from each party. So that's why we do have that one-page form for the dual agency disclosure, and then the confirmation and consent of dual agency. So again, if you're confused about the use of those forms, just give me a call, come see me, or reach out to your coach. There is the buyer information checklist that you'll want to complete, and then the buyer short sale checklist. That's only if needed. And that's dependent on the property and the market, and we can go through that short sale checklist another time. All right, so after you begin working with the buyer, if there are additional designated agents who are named after the initial disclosure, that has to be done in writing. We have to have that additional agent designation form completed and signed. You must advise the buyer that only the designated agents are his or her legal agents, and that other agents of the same company do not represent that buyer. So that is a singular relationship between you and your client. So it's important to notify your buyer that, hey, I'm working for you, but so-and-so in my office, they're not your agent, your representative. That agency relationship is only established with me. If that question or discussion would come up, you definitely want to make sure they understand the agency relationship. Caution your buyer not to disclose any confidential information with or to other agents on social media or otherwise. The confidential information needs to remain safe with the buyer and with you as their agent. Okay, when showing property, check the MLS or with the seller or the seller's agent. You will want to show the properties, obviously, with confirmation and consent to enter the homes. If you are showing your own listing, make sure that both buyer and seller have signed or have signified that they are okay with dual agency. Okay. Again, when you are showing property, you do want to be sure that you inform your buyer that their conversation could be recorded. There are all kinds of devices now, the Ring doorbell, different apparatuses people can have in their homes that will record while people are going through the house. And you and your buyer may not even be aware. So definitely have that conversation and let them know that they could be recorded. Their conversations could be recorded. So any conversation you have specifically about details of their interest or purchase of the property, you will want to have those off-site of the property. When presenting contracts in a disclosed dual agency situation, you advise the parties of their right to seek independent advice from an advisor or an attorney prior to signing any documents. You'll want to obviously obtain the property disclosures, the residential real property disclosure, the radon, the lead-based paint. Get those disclosures and then provide the lead-based paint pamphlet and the radon pamphlet to your buyers. Recommend that the buyers have inspections, and then if you are acting as a disclosed dual agent, you'll want to ensure that that confirmation of consent to dual agency is signed by all parties. Again, unless you've got those initials in two places already. As a listing agent, it would be on the listing agreement and on the purchase contract, and as a buyer's agent, it would be on that buyer's agency agreement form with the consent to dual agency, and then on the purchase contract. Okay, the execution of the contract, all parties must sign. There's some more discussion here about dual agency. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point. So again, if you have any questions about the dual agency relationship, just reach out to me or your coaches and we can explain those documents further. So now we're going to jump into the seller agency checklist. All right, so the seller agency checklist. Again, this list is very similar to the buyer agency checklist in that you first inquire of the consumer or the customer if they have any agency relationship with another realtor. So you want to establish that prior to entering into any kind of relationship with the buyer or the seller. You don't want to interfere with the agreements that may already be in place with other brokerages and other agents. So then upon initial contact, if the consumer is shopping for an agent, then you may want to disclose in writing that unless the consumer chooses to work with you, you will not be considered that person's agent. Otherwise, you will want to use the disclosure of seller's designated agent so the seller knows that you will protect the confidential information that the seller will share with you on the listing appointment. Some agents utilize that seller's designated agent form, and some listing agents don't. So, but you definitely have to have that conversation with the seller in that listing appointment or even on the phone, that if they share information with you, it either is or is not confidential based on the agency relationship that you and that consumer or customer establish. You'll want to advise the consumer of the designated agency relationship that would exist if you do represent them as their seller. And then obviously you talk about the compensation process and how the sponsoring broker, Keller Williams Marquis, will compensate how Keller Williams Marquis will compensate the cooperating broker if another agent brings a buyer to the transaction. We do at Keller Williams Marquis try to keep that co-op commission at 2.5%. So you would definitely need to reach an agreement with that seller on the commission amount that would facilitate a sufficient amount of commission to Keller Williams Marquis, whether that be a total commission of 5%, 6%, 7%. We can't price fix that, but that's a discussion between you and the customer or consumer in establishing that agency relationship and how that compensation is going to be established. And then the co-op would be a minimum of 2.5% to the cooperating brokerage off of that 5 or 6 or 7%. Okay. You will want to complete and have the seller sign the exclusive right to sell contract, or the exclusive right to sell listing agreement is actually the form that we utilize in our office. Exclusive right to sell listing agreement. There is an exclusive right to sell contract. That document just helps establish agency. A lot of that information does repeat the information that's already in the listing agreement. So you're totally fine to just do the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. That is the form that would be required through our office. You will want to advise the consumer regarding the dual agency possibility, have that discussion about agency. Are they comfortable with dual agency? And then have that form signed accordingly, as we've already discussed. In the listing agreement, the consumer, that your client at this point would identify you as the designated agent, and so then your agency relationship is established then. Once you have that listing signed, then you begin marketing the property through appointments. You need to have the discussion about showings, how to utilize the Showing Time app, the lockbox process, get a key to the property, discuss how other agents working with prospective buyers, how they would not want to communicate confidential information with those other agents if they come into contact with them. Sometimes a seller may be home during a showing. Of course, we advise that not to happen, but if they are, you definitely want to advise your seller not to communicate confidential information, because that creates some issues with that agency relationship. You are the seller's designated agent, and so they need to be filtering all information, questions, whatever it may be, through you as their designated agent, and not discuss those details with another agent. Of course, you talk about that confidential information, the open house procedures. If another agent needs to be named, whatever the situation may be, sometimes it may be you're going on vacation and you're naming another agent to help you with your business while you're out of town. It may be you're having a medical procedure, or whatever the situation may be. If another agent needs to step in and act for you or as you in this agency relationship, then again, just like with the buyer, that agent needs to be named as an additional designated agent in that situation. And there is a form for that as well. Okay. Again, you want to ask the seller if the property is equipped with any recording devices so that you have that information and you can disclose that information. And then when making appointments for the seller, obviously you'll want to have that discussion about the buyer not being allowed to contact the seller directly. And if they do, the seller needs to refer that buyer to the buyer's agent, and or if they're not represented by an agent, then to you as the designated listing agent. So there's a discussion about that here. Scrolling on down through the form, if you are not seller's designated agent, notify seller's designated agent of appointments and whether buyer is represented by an agent. So again, you cannot discuss anything confidential with somebody else's client, in other words. So you've got to respect, not only do you want buyers and sellers to acknowledge and respect and honor your agency relationship with each other, but you want other folks to respect and honor the agency relationships of yourself with your client and other agents with their client. So just be respectful of that agency relationship. All right, so when offers are made, your responsibility as the listing agent is to present all offers when they are presented. So you need to share those offers with your seller as soon as possible. Those offers should include the disclosures. You as a listing agent provide those disclosures. You upload them to the MLS so that buyers agents can obtain them and the buyers can review them prior to making an offer. So it's your responsibility to make those public on Maris, at least for other agents to utilize. And then those would need to be included obviously when an offer is written. Again, present all contracts to the seller, and then if the contract is accepted, then your responsibility is to deposit the earnest money as received. If you receive it, sometimes through trust funds, you don't even handle the earnest money anymore. Or sometimes the buyer takes it directly to the title company. Sometimes the buyer's agent delivers it to the title company. So it just depends, but you have to have that conversation and know how that earnest money is being deposited, and then have a record of that in your file for you and your client. You as the listing agent order the title commitment. You contact the title company and order the title commitment, and then you follow the process and assist the seller in negotiating and navigating through the inspection responses and the other deadlines and get to the closing table. So that is a brief discussion on your responsibilities as a listing agent, as a buyer's agent, and that agency relationship between your clients, whether buyer or seller. If you have more questions, then just reach out to your coach or contact me anytime.